So here's our third part of the lecture on cell structure. What we're looking at here is kind of an overview of most of the components of the cell that we've talked about. You got your nucleus, information comes out of the nucleus through those little nuclear pores, can go into the ribosomes. Those ribosomes get the information and then they typically create proteins. The proteins are put into little vesicles, these transport vesicles. They can then leave from the endoplasmic reticulum and move to the Golgi body, or Golgi apparatus. They go into the Golgi apparatus's cis phase. They come in, they get processed, they get turned into or repackaged into a slightly different form. And then they leave the Golgi from the trans phase and are put into little secretory vesicles, so other little bags, and then those bags blend into the cell membrane, and as they blend into the cell membrane, the product is secreted out of the cell. So earlier in the previous lecture, I mentioned the idea of testosterone or estrogen. Those are hormones produced in specific parts of the body, in specific cells in the testes or in the ovaries, and those hormones are then secreted into the bloodstream, transported throughout the entire human body. So the overview here is just kind of wrapping up everything we talked about in the first part and second part of this particular chapter. So here we are again looking at it, kind of the overview, but in this scenario, we have something coming into the cell that the cell doesn't like, and the lysosomes take over. They jump into the picture here, and they're attacking and trying to destroy particular products. If it's an organelle that needs to be broken down, an old or damaged organelle, lysosomes break it down and try to neutralize it or detoxify it. If the cell has actually ingested food through a process called phagocytosis, the lysosome then helps break that food down, digesting it, turning it into a more usable form that then can sometimes get moved into other parts of the cell. So use these two diagrams as kind of an overview and a review of what all those little cell structures are doing. Okay, so all of those things we talked about, all those structures are found in the eukaryotic cell. They're found in the animal cells. They're also found in the plant cell, and that's what we're looking at here. Now, the plant cell does have a few unique features that make it a little bit different than the animal cell. One of the big unique features found in plants is this big giant bag called the central vacuole. So you see that in the center of the plant cell. This vacuole is a big bag of water. This helps keep the cell's shape, kind of pushes it out and makes the cell rigid. So you think about a carrot or celery or an apple or the grass in your yard. All of those cells have these bags of water in them. And as long as they're full of water, the cell retains kind of a rigid, firm shape. The other major feature of plant cells that we do not see in the animal world is this green surrounding structure called the cell wall. Now, the cell wall is rigid. It's hard. It's made up of that polysaccharide called cellulose. We often refer to that as fiber. That gives a cell rigidity. It makes it like a little box or a little brick and helps retain that shape. So you can think about a tree or some plants you may have in your yard or in your house. They don't have bones. All of their cells have this cell wall. That's what gives them strength, rigidity, the ability to grow large, to have those branches. I mean, oak trees can get 100, 125 feet tall. I mean, they can get huge. That is because they have the cell wall for that structural support and rigidity. So those are two structures that are unique to plant cells that enable them to have a slightly different cellular shape. Okay, so some other structures we want to look at. The vacuoles. Again, the central vacuole can be used for storage of water. In some plant cells, it might store nutrients. It might store energy in the form of carbohydrates or maybe lipids. but vacuoles have a variety of functions in the plant cell. So those are going to be fairly unique and specific to plant cells, not in the animal cells. Animals have the little bags we call the vesicles. So we've looked at cells, talked about the general features, the brain center, the garbage truck, the shipping, the processing, all these other little structures and features. But what we need now to talk about is how cells get energy. Because every cell needs energy. And certain cells produce massive amounts of energy. And sometimes the energy is transported to other cells, if they're a cell that's primarily used for storage. But energy production is essential for cells to function. So there are two key structures that are going to be the powerhouses of the cell. The first one here is called the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria resembles this little bean-shaped structure in the cell. Big thing to remember, mitochondria are found in plants and animal cells. So this is not unique to one group or the other. This is found in both. This is the powerhouse of the cell. As sugar and oxygen go in, a process called cellular respiration occurs, which we'll be talking about in later chapters, and it produces ATP, it gives off carbon dioxide, it gives off heat, part of thermodynamics, and it results in the cell being able to function. The larger number of the mitochondria you have, the higher your metabolic rate. So think about mitochondria like tiny little engines. The more engines you have, the faster your cells can work, the more energy they burn, the more calories they will consume, higher metabolic rate. So certain cells in the human body, like nerve cells and muscle cells, have large concentrations of mitochondria. Other cells, like fat tissue or fat cells, very few mitochondria at all. Okay, so again, both plant and animal contain mitochondria. Now, chloroplasts are powerhouses that are typically found in plant cells. We will see chloroplasts in other groups of organisms. We will see them in certain bacteria. We will see them in a group of eukaryotic organisms called protistas, little single-celled things like euglena, volvox. These are just aquatic organisms that are not animals, they're not plants, they're kind of goofy, weird things, but they can run photosynthesis with that chloroplast. So the chloroplast runs photosynthesis for the organism that it is found in. What is getting challenging is that scientists have discovered different species that we originally would have thought were animals, but they can actually run photosynthesis because they contain chloroplasts. So we'll talk about it in a later chapter, but if you guys want to see it, Google a thing called the lettuce sea slug. Lettuce like the vegetable salad. Lettuce, Lettuce, C-S-E-A, slug, S-L-U-G. Check it out. Weird little creatures. Are they animals? Are they plants? But our chloroplast is essential for photosynthesis. We'll talk about that more when we get into that pathway and talk about how energy is produced that way. But if you have chloroplast, you can grab sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, bust it all apart, recombine it into sugars and oxygen and energy. So a very important second powerhouse structure that can be found in certain cells. Alright, now in plant cells, we often see these bags called plastids. So we have chloroplasts, leucoplasts, chromoplasts. These are all different types of plasts or bags that contain stuff. Now the chloroplast is the one we just saw, the green bag, runs photosynthesis. The chromoplast. Chromo is a bag that contains usually reds or oranges or yellows. So you see those leaves down below, and they have what we call the fall colors. The reds, the oranges, the yellows, sometimes purples. That is because they have a lot of these little bags called chromoplasts. They can actually run photosynthesis. They're just not as good as the green. But hey, if you lost all your green and it's October, November, and you still can use the sun to produce energy with red pigments, great. It's extra energy being produced before you eventually go dormant. The other plast you're looking at on the right-hand side are bags called leucoplasts. Now, leuco refers to white. White as in starch. The reason why we see little black droplets in there is because the starch has been stained. But normally a leucoplast is a white bag that contains starch molecules and appears white. So cut a potato in half. That stuff that leaks out, that's all starch. That is found in leucoplasts, these bags that contain stored energy. So plastids, additional bags that contain product or structures or stuff, if we want to call it that. So that's what we're looking at with our plastids. So when we look at all these cells in general, what we're looking at are cells that have nucleuses and all these other organelles. Now, what we're trying to understand better and get a stronger handle on is how did the eukaryotic cell actually show up? How did it evolve? And that is explained through what's known as the endosymbiont theory. So theory is supported by science. We can run experiments to support this. We have data to support this. There's a lot of research behind this saying this is how eukaryotic cells evolve. So the endosymbiont theory states an original cell, some kind of unknown archaea type of cell, single-celled prokaryote, started incorporating other bacteria inside of it. Now, it could have happened through eating, or perhaps this primitive archaean cell ate a cyanobacteria, some other bacteria that was running photosynthesis, and instead of digestion, they started working together. The original cell produced or provides protection, a home, place to live, safety, while the cyanobacteria runs photosynthesis and it gives off energy, glucose, oxygen to its host cell. So instead of digestion, you start working together as a team over the course of long periods of time. And eventually, instead of trying to engulf and accumulate more cyanobacteria, they start reproducing inside of the host cell. And that's where we get our chloroplast and our producers from, organisms that contain chloroplast. The mitochondria, similar concept, but instead of running photosynthesis, that type of cell is running cellular respiration. And those are the structures that evolved into the mitochondria within the host cell. So as those things occur over lots and lots and lots of generations, the cells become dependent upon each other. A thing called symbiotic relationship. They work together, they're dependent upon each other, and they're both benefiting each other with this scenario. So the endosymbiont theory is how we explain the origin of eukaryotic cells.